Welcome to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast for farmers and ag professionals by the Iowa Farm Bureau, bringing you the news, experts, and educational insights that matter most. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to our December 22nd edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. I'm Andrew Wheeler. Today, we're bringing you discussions with conservation leader Ruth McCabe and ag policy expert Mary Kay Thatcher. We'll start with Ruth McCabe, who serves as the Conservation Manager for Heartland Co-op and is a key player in making it easier and quicker for Iowa farmers to install edge-of-field practices to filter nitrates from water. Spokesman reporter Bob Beyond recently had a chance to sit down with Ruth McCabe.
Welcome, Ruth, and thanks for being with us today to talk about exciting conservation efforts taking place across Iowa, and in particular, batch and build projects. Before we jump into the weeds, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and Heartland Cooperative, what you do, and how conservation fits into your mission?
First of all, I'm happy to be here, and thanks so much for inviting me. My title with Heartland Cooperative is Conservation Manager. I'm an agronomist, but I focus on conservation farming practices. And so Heartland is your classic agricultural retailer, but we're a cooperatively managed agricultural retailer and cooperatively owned, which means that we provide any of the services that a farmer will need, right? So feed, fuel, grain, fertilizers, you name it. If a farmer needs it on a farm, we can provide that service, and we're full service. Depending on how you define location, we have anywhere from 75 to 80 locations across central Iowa into Nebraska and down into Texas. We service around 6,000 farmers, 5 to 6 million acres. So we're a larger agricultural cooperative, and we offer conservation agronomic advising because more and more farmers are requesting knowledge and help and technical assistance as it relates to using things like cover crops or managing their nutrients, like doing split application or variable rate application for nutrients, or looking at edge of field practices like saturated buffers or buffer strips or filter strips. So this knowledge exists within local, state, and federal agencies, but those folks can sometimes be hard to get a hold of or can be just difficult to communicate with. So oftentimes farmers turn to their sales agronomists for guidance, and sales agronomists don't have a lot of conservation knowledge. So Heartland realized 5 or 6 years ago, hey, we need somebody on staff that understands agronomics, but that also understands conservation. And so they hired me in 2020, and I have since helped to expand the team to now we have 5 conservation staffers on my team, and we're looking to hire another one this winter. So there's only more demand for us, and it's an exciting time for Heartland and conservation.
We're going to talk a little bit about batch and build today. And for listeners who may not be as familiar, can you explain what the batch and build model is and how it works to accelerate water quality projects?
Yes. Okay. So what is the batch and build model? First, I'll just quickly define like a conservation farming practice is any kind of a farming practice that a farmer can use on their farm fields that reduces the loss of soil or nutrients from their farm fields, which we care about because soil and nutrients, we want to keep those things in the field. We don't want to lose them to surrounding water. And the issue is that with production agriculture, it's just an unfortunate byproduct of production agriculture is that you do tend to have some leakiness when it comes to soil and nutrients, and we don't want that. But that impacts water quality. So there's all kinds of things that can be done in the field, but oftentimes still some nutrients make it to the edge of the field, i.e. next to the creek or the stream, we've got soil or nutrients that are making it out of the field, usually through tile water or in the soil, right? So the batch and build model is this unique approach to packaging up a particular conservation practice and batching it in a region and batching it with design services from an engineer and batching it from the perspective of a construction installer to where you're just blitzing across the landscape and hitting up these small local areas, but getting everything done that's in that small local area. In this instance, the batch and build that we are doing at Heartland, we are batch and building saturated buffers and bioreactors. But to be clear, that model could be applied to any kind of conservation practice. So we're basically just going to a regional area and saying to anybody that's along a stream or a creek, hey, you have a field that would work for a saturated buffer, and we're doing your neighbor's field. Can we do yours at the same time? So we're slowly making our way across the state with the batch and build model, and it's been incredibly successful so far. The best part about it is that neighbors know that they can turn to another neighbor and talk to them about their experience or talk to them about the practice, and they know that they have several neighbors that are all in the same boat with them, which just sort of builds the sense of community around it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about your project in Tama and Grundy counties. Looks like it's finishing up here real quick, installing 14 saturated buffers and 4 bioreactors. What makes this effort especially significant for the Middle Cedar watershed?
So yes, we have a batch and build that's just finishing up installation. We have just a couple more bioreactors that need finished, and then it will be done. Construction started earlier this summer. It's so exciting because it's in the Middle Cedar watershed, and Cedar Rapids is the second largest municipality in Iowa, second only to Des Moines, right? And they get their water from the Cedar River watershed. So it's important for them because it means cleaner water for them. So they are supporting our batch and build, and they're supporting other batch and builds in the Cedar River watershed as well. They're excited about it because they like to focus on upstream partnerships with upstream landowners. It's a win-win for them, means they get cleaner water, and it's a win for upstream landowners because it means that they get some support in installing these practices, which don't otherwise do much for their agricultural bottom line.
So this is your third batch and build over the last couple of years?
So I have been involved in the batch and build model actually since 2021 when I worked in partnership with Polk County on a batch and build that they were launching. But since then, Heartland has had their own batch and build partnership with Iowa Seed Association and Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. This is our third one being installed this summer. We installed 2 last summer, and next year we will have 2 that will be getting installed.
What has the momentum kind of looked like, and what kind of lessons have you learned along the way?
The demand is greater than what we can supply right now, which is a fantastic problem to have. There is so much demand, predominantly because you'll do a batch in an area, and then there might be a landowner that you approached to be in that batch, but they sort of hemmed and hawed about it. So you'll move forward with the batch, you'll install the practices. That landowner will go out, talk to their neighbor, go see the practice, and they'll go, oh, I should have done this. Invariably, there's plenty of landowners to come back and do a second batch in a similar area, right? So for example, in Tama Grundy, there are several sites that we have in Tama where landowners have approached us who said no last year, and they're kind of saying yes now. So that's what's really exciting. Demand is greater than supply. We're not the only batch and build in the state. There are probably 4 or 5 other batch and builds that are happening around the state, and many more will be coming online in the next few years. Now, the lessons that I've learned, communication is key. Communication between whoever your fiscal agent is, whether that's Iowa Department of Ag, like IDALS, or if that's Iowa Seed Association or Cedar Rapids, whoever is managing the cost share money needs to be in really good communication with whoever the project manager is. In my case, that's me and my team. We're the project managers, need to be in good communication with the construction installer and the engineer. These 4 parties have to be in communication with each other. And you need to have somebody, usually the project manager, who's been physically on these sites, surveyed all of them, knows the landowners, knows everything about these, because the goal here is between the fiscal agent, the engineer, the construction installer, and the project manager, those people are taking the mental labor off the shoulders of the landowners. It's a giant easy button for landowners, but in order for it to be an easy button for landowners, it means that those people that I just described are absorbing a lot of that mental labor. And it means that those people really have to be in good communication with each other. Whenever I'm asked to give workshops on the batch and build and how other ag retailers or construction installers or engineers can get involved in the process, I always start with, okay, you need to communicate as much as you think you need to communicate, and then you need to increase that by 3 times. Because if you think somebody understands what you were trying to say to them on the phone while you were driving and there was sound of wind in the background, they probably didn't get it. So anyway, communication's key among all the partners. And then for that matter, keeping it easy for the landowners. Because if it's easy for the landowners, they're going to hit that easy button and they're going to say yes.
So about the partnerships, you mentioned IDALS, ISG, Iowa Seed Association, and others. What makes this cross-industry collaboration so effective and perhaps different from traditional conservation efforts?
What makes it so unique is that it is private industry leaning into this. I mean, if you think about it, just from a financial standpoint, we are incentivized to get practices in the ground because that's how we're paid, right? So, and it's not Iowa Department of Ag that's paying my team to get these practices in the ground. It's all of my private industry partners who are saying, this is easy. We can plug into this. This is a physical thing that we can go out and see. And it has measurable impact on water quality, which has been agreed upon by Iowa State University, University of Iowa, researchers in Minnesota and Illinois, and around the world, to be perfectly honest. We're not the only ones implementing these practices. So the beauty of it is we're plugging into private industry, which can move faster and which can move far more efficiently. We are totally fine with public agency oversight, and we think that that should exist and should be there. So public agency oversight and auditing is a part of our process, and that should be there because public agencies are paying for the physical practices. So those are tax dollars that are going into those physical practices. There ought to be that level of oversight. But when it comes to giving me the latitude to move quickly, find an engineer, move on surveying, my team, when we go out to survey, we're out there at 6:30 in the morning and we don't leave until 7 o'clock at night. And you don't get that from a government agency. You don't get that from a public agency, but you get it from my team because we are directly incentivized by our private industry partners to get the job done quickly and efficiently. So it's just this beautiful mashup of efficiency with appropriate public agency oversight, and you wind up with a process that's much faster. So my team can do a batch and build from start to finish in between 18 to 24 months. And I say this without hubris, we are the fastest batch and build process in the state. We're efficient, and we have really slimmed that down. If you're as a landowner, just to give you some context, if you as a landowner wanted to get a saturated buffer or bioreactor as a one-off on your own, not through the batch and build process, and you were just working with like your local NRCS office, you'd be looking at a 3 to 5 year turnaround probably. So we've just sped it up and we keep it cheap.
Yeah, let's build on that a little bit from the farmer's perspective. What makes batch and build projects so appealing? You touched on that a little bit, especially when they don't have to cover out-of-pocket costs.
As I alluded to earlier, we make it a giant easy button for them. I always joke, anybody who wants to take on the batch and build process from the project management standpoint had better be prepared for a bit of a dumpster fire because you've got several landowners, several pieces of property, tenant farmers, etc. Every farm is unique, and so every contract is unique, every approach is unique, every design is unique. So you're managing that. But if you take on that labor, it means that for the landowners or the farmers, you get together with them 3 or 4 times. They see a preliminary design. They say yes. You get together with them again. They sign a contract. You get together with them again. They see their final designs. You're doing all the work for them. They don't have to hire the contractor. They don't have to coordinate with 5 different agencies. They don't have to keep their receipts or their invoice to get their money back. And they're not being taxed on that cost share money either, because that money is going through a public agency fiscal agent. So there's no taxes. There's no real paperwork they have to do. We're the ones who are managing all of that. And all they have to do is say yes every time you get together with them or provide you with some feedback and then say yes. So it's very attractive from that standpoint. For farmers, it's attractive specifically because on the whole, we're installing these under existing filter strips or riparian areas. We're not taking land out of production. This is getting installed under the grassy strip you already have on the edge of your field. And now IDAL's Iowa Department of Ag has a streamside buffer program. So if you don't have a buffer strip or filter strip in place and you want to have it paid for, it will get paid for as well. So there's no excuse. If you wanted a filter strip, here's your chance. It'll get paid for. The saturated buffer gets installed at the same time, and you've got literally no out-of-pocket costs, not even taxes. Plus, there is, depending on who is running the batch and build, my batch and build program provides a $1,000 per outlet temporary construction incentive to just allow us to go in and install the practice. We pay you $1,000 per outlet to do it. So we pay you to participate in the program. It sounds too good to be true, but it's not.
Talk a little bit about the water quality benefits. I think I've seen some numbers, and correct me if I'm wrong. 18 new practices in this project will treat 24 tile outlets. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
So what kind of real world water quality benefits are these bringing to the watershed? And you talked a little bit about even downstream communities like Cedar Rapids.
So when you're talking saturated buffers and bioreactors, predominantly they are removing nitrates. If you're installing an above ground grassy filter strip or buffer strip, then you're also probably capturing soil. And so therefore you're also reducing phosphates or phosphorus in the water. But mainly we look at this as a nitrogen treatment tool from tile water. For example, our Rhinebeck batch is treating 24 outlets. It's one of our smaller batches, but it's treating about 1,600 or 1,700 upland drainage acres. So like our batches that we installed last year treated, I think, close to 2,500 or 3,000 upland drainage acres, but that's because we were installing more practices. But the bottom line is that's basically equal to a good-sized nutrient treatment wetland. So our 24 outlets that we're treating, 1,600, 1,700 acres, that's the equivalent of a very good-sized nutrient treatment wetland, but it's not invasive, meaning we're not taking acres out of production and it's just going on the edge of the field. And the beauty of that is that when you do the math on that, the average saturated buffer removes anywhere from 40 to 60% of the dissolved nitrates in the water on a yearly basis. It would be 100%, except that, hey, we have times of high water, like in a rainstorm or snowmelt, and then these saturated buffers allow some water to go around them or bypass them so that we're not backing water up in a field. So there is a bypass line on these structures. So that lowers the overall efficiency of the structure. But when you do the math on that, if you think about how many pounds of nitrogen are applied on average to a cornfield, you do the math on that, that's not insignificant. And then on average, if you look at what Iowa State University, for example, estimates is lost over the winter, I think the estimate for loss is 30 pounds of nitrogen if nitrogen is applied in the fall, 30 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So 50% of that is 15 pounds, 1,500 acres times 15 pounds. That's a lot of pounds of nitrogen that are just being removed. And how is that nitrogen removed? It's released as N2 gas, which is 70% of our atmosphere is N2 gas. You and I are breathing it right now, right? So at the end of the day, the impact is thousands of pounds of nitrogen that are removed from tile water in this one batch. And that's not a one-off. That's every year until these saturated buffers fail, which will be 50 to 60 years from now, depending on how long that tile structure lasts. So that's that much nitrogen that's held back in the landscape and just released as N2 gas. That's a big impact.
So we've talked about saturated buffers, bioreactors a little bit. What other types of conservation methods are effective in improving water quality and soil health? Projects that Iowa farmers are taking on, cover crops, wetlands, you name it.
So like you can take a saturated buffer or a bioreactor, and there's sort of a microcosm for a larger suite of practices. For example, nutrient treatment wetlands or oxbow restorations. Oxbow restorations are just like mini nutrient treatment wetlands, right? An oxbow restoration is in between a bioreactor or a saturated buffer and a large-scale nutrient treatment wetland. And honestly, if I had to pick my favorite, I would go for more oxbow restorations, like a tile-fed oxbow restoration. And that might be an example where a farmer already has a grassy riparian area along a creek. Once upon a time, 30 years ago, it was straightened. And so there's this old little loopy scar. That's an oxbow. And they don't farm it. It gets wet sometimes, but otherwise it's just this weird depression. And there's a tile that goes by it to the creek, right? That is a perfect environment for an oxbow restoration. And if we're capturing like 150 to 200 acres of drainage, it's better to do an oxbow restoration than it is to do a bioreactor. And now the cool thing about wetlands is they capture so much more than just nitrates. They capture phosphates. They capture any kind of chemical application to the field. Anything that dissolves in water, they're going to capture. So you can go from an oxbow then right into a nutrient treatment wetland, which are much larger. Nutrient treatment wetlands, unlike oxbows, tend to be somewhat invasive in that they are taking some acres out of production usually. An oxbow usually doesn't take acres out of production, but a nutrient treatment wetland does. However, the impact of a nutrient treatment wetland is massive, right? So you've got that permanent component of conservation, and there are many landowners who are lining up right now to do these kinds of things. Tenant farmers. I care a lot about tenant farmers because that's my bread and butter. Those are the people who I work with the most. I don't necessarily work with a lot of landowners. I mostly work with either owner-operators or tenant farmers. And it's for tenant farmers that I'm particularly aiming my sights at right now. I want to create cost share programs for them that get at the adoption support for in-field conservation practices like cover crops. We have some cover crop support, and I'll tell you what, of the cost share support that we have, it gets maxed out just about every year now. Right. So tenant farmers are absolutely interested in adopting cover crops, which roughly have an efficiency of anywhere from 15 to 30% nutrient removal, not just nitrates, but phosphates and other like fertilizers, N and P predominantly, right? They're taking up both N and P as a cover crop, and they're hanging on to it all winter long. There are a lot of tenant farmers that are interested in cover crops, but we don't yet provide enough cost share support for them. So that's something I'm aiming my sights at next, is getting more support for in-field practices.
Well, looking ahead a little bit, you've touched on this a little bit also, but for Heartland Co-op and batch and build projects planned for next year, 2026, what's next for your conservation work? How do you see this whole model evolving a little bit?
So what's next is we do have a couple of batches coming down the pike. One batch, it's predominantly saturated buffers, and it will be in the middle Iowa watershed, which is Marshall County and Poweshiek counties, I think some Tama. And then we've got another batch next summer in the lower Cedar. So that's Scott, Cedar, Muscatine, Louisa counties. So those are going to be two batches. They are almost all saturated buffers. It's just a handful of bioreactors. And then something else we're working on is we've got an oxbow wetland restoration happening this winter. And then I think we'll be working on a couple more oxbow restorations next year. And what's next for us is we are expanding our services into oxbow restorations, because like I said, they're really cool practices. But the conservation industry as a whole, we have already seen this expansion in the direction of doing more wetland restorations. And I think we're going to see more of those happening, especially oxbows. And if a nutrient treatment wetland works in the right place, I think you'll see more of those happening, but in key places. They're expensive. So we have to put them in a smart place. And so what I see is the question mark for me, as I already alluded to, is there's people talking about creating more support for in-field practices for tenant farmers. And that's where I'm sort of like, it's cloudy for me. I don't know if it's coming, but I am advocating strongly for it. So I hope what we see is also increased support or improved support for in-field practice adoption, because I want to start going to tenant farmers and saying, hey, we've got something for you too.
Well, let's end with this. I'd love to hear from you on a personal note. What does it mean to you to see these projects taking root and making measurable improvements in Iowa's water quality?
What it means to me is I love being an agronomist and I love production agriculture. I chose this career not from Iowa, I'm from California. Don't hold it against me. But I moved here to have a career in agronomy and to work with farmers on crop production. But I'm also a conservationist at heart. So I love being able to meld my love of agronomy with conservation. And I love going to bed every night knowing that what I and my team is doing is measurably improving our water quality and measurably improving our environment. Anybody who knows me will tell you, Ruth's really passionate. She really cares about this. The other thing that I love is that my team is really passionate, and I have been able to help create 4, soon to be 5 more jobs for other people who are equally as passionate as I am about this, to spread my company's sort of mission to get conservation to be more widespread. We can spread that mission and have further reach. And we are going to farmers who say to us, I'm so excited you guys are doing this. I had no idea who was going to give me this kind of practical knowledge while also understanding my business model. I've heard that I don't know how many times. I've heard that from so many tenant farmers especially. So that's what makes me so excited about this, is it's like, wow, we're really making this work. I've created jobs for people. They're excited about it. Farmers are excited about it. And it's just, there's just so much energy around it. I can't see it flopping. I just see it expanding. But that's what really jazzes me up, is it's like we've created a whole industry and I don't think it's slowing down.
If farmers would like to get a hold of you or your team, how can they do that?
My team has a generic phone number that you can reach all of us at, and it's on our website. So if you go to www.conservationagronomy.com, you will find our phone number and our generic email address that you can reach out to, and one of our team members will get back to you.
Thanks, Ruth. I think Ruth really captures the excitement and urgency farmers and their ag partners are bringing to the adoption of important edge-of-field conservation practices like bioreactors and saturated buffers. When folks in agriculture encounter challenges, they're eager to work together on solutions, and that's certainly the case when it comes to protecting our water quality. If you'd like to learn more about the batch and build conservation opportunities through Heartland Co-op, we've included a link to the website Ruth mentioned, conservationagronomy.com, down in the notes for this podcast episode. And while you're down there, be sure to check out Iowa Farm Bureau's website on the conservation and water quality progress that's being made across Iowa, conservationcountsiowa.com. Next up is Mary Kay Thatcher. Those of you who have been around Farm Bureau for years are familiar with Mary Kay. She's an Iowa native who served as a longtime lobbyist with the American Farm Bureau. Today, she serves as an independent ag policy consultant and recently shared an ag policy update with our members at Iowa Farm Bureau's 2025 Annual Meeting and County Leadership Conference. That's where spokesman editor Tom Block caught up with Mary Kay Thatcher.
Mary Kay, there's lots of news that comes out of Washington, D.C. almost continually, and headlines that come out every week. Where does agriculture fit in the Trump administration and in Congress? And what's the general mood in Washington, D.C. right now?
Well, I think there's a lot of frustration in Washington, D.C. with trying to get things done, and more difficult, especially with, there just being a couple vote margin in the House and a couple vote margin in the Senate. So with the partisanship that's going on, which is probably worse now than it's ever been, it's hard to get things done, and that makes people kind of frustrated. But I would say President Trump is quite aware that 78% of farmers supported him in this election. He hadn't forgotten it. He's not likely to forget it. And I think he is trying to do what's right for farmers. We could talk about, are tariffs really what's right? And I would have personal questions about that. But I think he believes it's what's right. And, maybe 6 months or a year from now, we'll see what the outcome of that is.
Let's talk a little bit about the trade and the tariffs. That's certainly the issue that's on everyone's mind. And in the first Trump administration, we had the tariffs and we ended up with a resolution. So do you see a similar path forward, or where are we at on that arc? Or is this just a bargaining chip that we're going to be dealing with for the foreseeable future?
Well, certainly this president feels like tariffs are the negotiating tactic that would work best. And, he doesn't want to go back to the free and the fair trade agreements, the NAFTAs, the USMCAs, et cetera. He wants to do, more that what can be done without Congress and move things along. And in some respects, you can understand that because, an average bilateral trade agreement takes something like 45 months, so very close to 4 years to get done. It's a very long-term process. And if he can go in and negotiate some of this stuff and get outcomes, that's great. I think the concern is not really about, things that we're able to get as far as like sanitary and phytosanitary agreement changes, is, for example, China opening up to be more supportive of biotech, et cetera, those kinds of things. The tariffs themselves, however, certainly you think about soybeans and how important they are to the state of Iowa. I mean, it's hurt the soybean market. And I think it's yet to be seen whether or not the tariffs work. You look at even the agreements that they said, okay, 12 million metric tons more for this year, 25 for the next 3. Well, 25 million metric tons is still less than we've been selling to China for a good 8 or 10 years. So I think you have to sort of sit back and question, is this progress or not?
And what's the overall relationship with China like? Obviously, they've been an important customer. A lot of talk in the news about soybeans, but for Iowa, it's also pork. And they have invested in Brazil and China. So what are those dynamics of the overall global relationship between the U.S. and China, and then China and Brazil?
Well, certainly you're talking about the two biggest economic powers in the world. And so there's going to be tension. I think there will continue to be tension. I think, Xi Jinping wants to do what's best for China. He has had a lot of autonomy, given his essentially dictator status, to go in and do things more quickly. So you look at things like the Belt and Road Initiative that I think we've thought of more as kind of an Asian initiative, but go to Brazil now and you look at what they've done with funding some infrastructure down there, funding major piers, for example, ports to be able to do more exports from there. They've gone to Africa and put in they're just going around the world, I think, and spreading wealth and trying to, maybe nicely said, buy friends. And I think they also have made a real movement towards diversifying. We've talked about for a long time, boy, we got a lot of eggs in the basket of China. And we've tried to do things. I think U.S. Soybean Export Council has done a wonderful job trying to build new markets. But when you send 50% of your beans somewhere, there's a lot of markets to try to make up for that 50%. They've done better. They've gone to Brazil. They've gone to Argentina. They're helping build their infrastructure so that their prices will better match. They've done better about diversifying, or at least being able to diversify, than we have with many of our commodities.
And one more question on trade. We're in the midst, or we will be next year, with the mandatory review of the USMCA with our two biggest trading partners at the moment, Canada and Mexico. So what do you see in the future there? There's, I know, some back and forth and, again, some headlines, but what do you see in that relationship and how important those markets are to Iowa
Well, they're
farmers?
pretty critical for agriculture. Mexico's our number one market now, Canada number 2, China number 3. So you look at, those 3, they have 50% of our ag exports. So we got to make sure we get it right. I think we've proved in agriculture that trade has gone up like 45%, our exports to both Mexico and Canada since we signed NAFTA in 1994. It's a very positive trajectory, and we'd like to continue to grow that market. Are there some issues that need to be taken care of? Yes. Dairy, for example, comes to everybody's mind. And there's other sanitary, phytosanitary. So certainly there are things that have to be brought forth and dealt with, but boy, we got to do everything we can to make sure we continue to be a part of USMCA.
Moving into the Farm Bill, it's been a while since we had a regular Farm Bill. We've had 2, I think, 1-year extensions now. So it's been 7-8 years since we've had the full 5-year Farm Bill extension. We have some very good things that were done last year in the One Big Beautiful Bill. But where do you see the Farm Bill currently, and what's the future there?
I'm afraid I'm not a very positive thinker when it comes to the idea of getting a farm bill in 2026. We have to do something because in October, this farm bill will expire again. And, we have those permanent programs that have to be reauthorized or go back to parity prices and all kinds of crazy things. But, I think that there is quite a large sector of agriculture that is going to look at the farm bill that passed as part of the One Big Beautiful Bill and the $66 billion in more ARC and more PLC and more crop insurance premium subsidies and say, that was a pretty good deal. And, we could go into some new negotiation about a further farm bill where we try to pick up some of the things off the cutting room floor and we could lose more than we gain. So let's think about that before we really jump in and say, yes, this is something we have to have. Now, I think that is a little bit tied to the idea of this $12 billion bridge payment that the administration just announced. And, how will that all play out when the numbers actually come out? But I think you have to remember overall, what most economists will tell you, that is, we look at corn, wheat, soybeans, cotton, rice, peanuts, a few other things like the 9 major crops, we're probably going to lose $35 billion in agriculture this year. So I tell you, we're going to put $11 billion in row crop payments, according to what USDA said recently. Is that going to offset enough of that $35 billion loss, especially after the 3 consecutive years of bad years, especially after the fact that most people think 2026 is going to be at least as hard, if not harder? So if it's not enough, and then you really have Congress saying we got to have more money, maybe doing that as part of a farm bill is the way to go. But I think it'll be a very tough road. And one thing I think you also have to keep in mind is we're really going to be pushing for time in Congress this year with the election coming up. You're always stopping at like June, July, then it's just too totally partisan and everybody looking at the election. I wouldn't be surprised this time if it's not more like an April, May stop date. So we don't have a whole lot of time to get in there and do something.
Another issue, one of the positives that's come out of the administration is deregulation. We had the president talking at a cabinet meeting about emissions in tractors, and then waters of the U.S., we had a rule come out that's pretty favorable, pretty clear to agriculture. So talk about those victories for agriculture in the deregulatory environment.
I think probably a real good definition for waters of the U.S. that was proposed. I think that not a huge issue in Iowa, but there was some positive changes as far as the Endangered Species Act and not being so difficult for a lot of farmers to be able to live with. I haven't really seen as many major regulatory changes as I thought we would. Yeah, I think we see a lot of kind of smaller ones, but not major changes, which surprises me. So I suspect that that's one of the things that we will indeed pick up on in 2026. Again, I think President Trump really wants to make sure farmers are okay. And when he can look at things like WOTUS or E15 or some of these things that would really help farmers but wouldn't be a high cost item for the government, I just feel like he's going to be supportive of agriculture.
How about the administration's focus on consolidation? A lot of talk about 4 major packers controlling a large share of the market, and even now in the seed industry. So what's the attitude there?
Well, I think the administration really stepped up. I mean, certainly they started talking about meat packing plants, a month or so ago, but just in the last few days, they've talked about, okay, now we want to look at seed and chemicals and fertilizer and equipment manufacturers, et cetera. And the administration said they're going to set up a couple task force that have 6 months to come up with some ideas. And then there was some other verbiage, which I can't quote for you, that talked about we really want to focus on foreign entities too. So again, if you were a betting person, you'd bet they're going to focus on Smithfield and Syngenta as Chinese companies, but you got Bayer and BASF, Germany, you got JBS, Brazil. And so you got a lot of foreign entities that are controlling this stuff. But I got to believe that something happens on consolidation. I don't know what it is, but I don't think he would put this much emphasis into that kind of a study and talk about it unless he intended to do something. Now, whatever he does, boy, it's hard to convince the Department of Justice that there's the legal authority to do that. But I think this president also does things where he doesn't always know if he has the legal authority, but he says, I'm on try. They take me to court and win. Okay, well, then we'll change directions. So I strongly suspect looking at consolidation in agriculture will be one of those issues. He'll push the envelope on it.
As we've talked about, a lot of issues out there. How can farmers make an impact on some of these issues with their national legislators?
Well, they got to stay in touch. National legislators, state legislators, everybody. you have to tell the story. And even in Iowa, we are so lucky to have all 6 members truly understand agriculture, understand the importance of agriculture in Iowa, whether it's, a real farmer or whether it's an agribusiness, et cetera. Those folks don't always know everything about what's going on. And certainly you get these young staffers that come in, and so few of the staffers that come in now really have any agricultural background. So they're in need of people that are willing to give them their number and spend time with them explaining an issue, explaining how does this kind of a legislative proposal or regulatory, how would that really affect your farm or your neighbor's farm or whatever. But we got to take our people and make sure they're very, very strong leaders in staying in touch with Congress and state legislators both.
Yeah, not only those fly-ins that we do when we take members out to D.C., but the town halls when the lawmaker comes home, and establishing that, like you say, so you're in their phone and they can call you when there's an issue.
Yep, absolutely. You want to be there, and in town halls, I've seen town halls where somebody says, I'm going to come here, and, maybe 3 people show up. But that member of Congress has said, I'll be here from 3 to 4. So you got an hour of their time. That's pretty valuable. Another thing is with the elections coming up, my gosh, give $25 to these fundraisers and go support the person and have conversations with them and let them know you're there for them, etc. These members have to get reelected. It's a very expensive bill these days.
Thanks, Mary Kay. I'll take a chance to echo the sentiment Mary Kay expressed near the end of that interview. Whether it's educating lawmakers or engaging candidates, it's crucial for farmers to be active and involved, and that will certainly be the case in 2026. And there's no better place to start than with your local county farm bureau. If you aren't already active with your county farm bureau, I'd encourage you to make that a resolution for the new year. Farm Bureau is the united, grassroots voice of agriculture. It's a place where your voice does make a difference. To get started with your local county farm bureau, check out the link we've provided down in the notes for this episode. That's all for this edition of the Spokesman Speaks podcast. We hope you all have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and hope that you'll join us for our next episode on January 5th. Thank you for doing the work that inspires everything we do here at the Iowa Farm Bureau, and thanks for listening to the Spokesman Speaks.
Thank you for listening to the Spokesman Speaks, a podcast by Iowa Farm Bureau. Check out more podcast episodes at iowafarmbureau.com/podcast. You can also find and subscribe to the Spokesman Speaks podcast in the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and other popular podcast apps. We appreciate your ratings and reviews, and we welcome you to email us your feedback at podcast@ifbf.org.